When you are learning photography, one of the first things you get told to learn is how to shoot in manual mode as soon as you can. And even when you've been a photographer for a number of years, it is often seen that you should be using manual mode all of the time.
Oh, hey, you're a photographer.
Yeah, I am.
Are you shooting in manual mode?
No, I'm actually using...
To be a real photographer though, you need to be in control of everything. You need to be at one with your camera.
But I was
once doing a photography job at Buckingham Palace.
Right, okay.
Imagine if I turned up there and I found out I wasn't shooting in manual mode. A professional photographer not shooting in manual. Whatever next?
What camera do you use?
I shoot with a Nikon. Nice to meet you.
We've all heard stories like that before, and while yes, learning manual mode is incredibly important in your early development as a photographer and learning how all of your different settings might affect something else within the final image that you are trying to create. And yes, again, learning manual mode should be one of the first things you do when you are learning about photography, but it's not essential that you use it all of the time. Not even the most successful of professional photographers do that, and it's all about picking and choosing between different settings and modes on your camera that might work in different scenarios. I'll come on to this.
There is so much more that goes into photography than just the settings you use on the camera. The settings are almost just one small part of the bigger picture. The bigger picture, did you get it? That was a complete fluke, I didn't mean that. You obviously have exposure, but then you have other things like which gear do you need to use, which lenses, which focal length, which aperture, the lighting, the composition. All of these different things go into taking a great photograph, and a professional photographer will know how each of those individual things affects what it is they are trying to do. Your camera settings are almost one of the easiest parts of the whole process, believe it or not, and that is why you should think about using other modes on your camera like Aperture Priority mode. It's one of the modes that I use most on my camera, unless I'm trying to do something very specific like add motion blur into the photo when I've got water in the scene, for example, or I've got a super fast moving subject and I need to make sure that they are frozen. Ironic, on a day like today, it is cold.
Aperture Priority mode is a great tool for all photographers of all abilities because it allows you to have control over one of the most important aspects of photography, which we all tend to look for in images, in depth of field, but then it also allows for the ease of use and speed because it takes away a couple of things that you might otherwise be thinking about. But while doing this, it still allows you enough control to be creative and to get your desired results. By selecting Aperture Priority mode, you can determine how much of the image that you want to be in focus, and therefore you can emphasize a subject and create a sense of depth. Maybe you're shooting portraits of people and you want that nice blurry background, or you might be out shooting landscapes and you just want the whole scene to be in focus. And controlling your aperture is one of the main ways in which you can do this, as well as a few other things such as the proximity of your subject from the camera or your focal length. But for this video, all we're talking about is aperture.
I like things like this as well, where there's signs and just things to make you think about the photographs. Just that sign there says, keep off, rolling logs can kill. Seems a little bit extreme to me, but there we go. When you're using Aperture Priority mode, it provides speed and flexibility to be able to make your job quicker and easier. And that is great, for example, if you were a wedding photographer, because, for example, you might be out shooting some photos outside with the bride and groom, and then you've quickly got to get inside where it is much darker because they're walking inside and you've got to get those shots and you can't ask them to do it again. If you do this in Aperture Priority mode, you've got a little bit of peace of mind because you know the camera is going to quickly adapt to those change in lighting conditions and you're going to be able to get those shots without compromising any quality. It's also great for when you're in situations like this, like in a forest like I am now, because the sun's going down fairly quickly. It's behind a lot of trees. It's pretty dark out here, to be honest, and in other situations it's very bright when you're pointing towards the sun. So it just helps free you up a little bit. And it's great because you know you're going to get the same look and feel to your images that you are after when you're on your shoot. It is going dark fairly quickly.
There are a couple of things to be aware of when you are using aperture priority mode, because as you are locking your aperture to a specific number, let's say for the sake of this video f4, that then means that you are losing control over two other aspects of the exposure triangle in your shutter speed and your ISO. When you lock your aperture down, that then means that your camera is going to do all of these calculations to try and get the correct exposure for the image and you choose the correct settings. That means that you might potentially have a shutter speed that is too slow for the image, and that might introduce some motion blur that you don't want. Or the camera might increase the ISO higher than you would like, which would introduce unwanted things like grain, noise, and artifacts that you might not really want in your image. There are, however, a couple of things you can do to compensate that, and you can choose ranges that your camera will work between when you are shooting in this mode. So you can set your camera to shoot at a shutter speed no slower than you select, and you can also set it to work between a certain ISO range. I typically set mine to shoot no slower than 1/25th of a second, and I set my ISO to work between 100 and 4000 at the highest level. Now I use the Lumix S5 and S5 II, but you can do this on whichever camera that you use.
I also really like stuff like this. Do not ask me why, because it's a little bit weird, but James Popsis talks about this a lot. He talks about man-made things in nature. And this is exactly that, because we're in this stunning forest, but there's a random little portaloo just plonked in the middle. It's locked as well. Weird. Things like that that make you think about photographs really appeal to me. It makes you ask questions. I like that. Can't believe how many pictures of a portaloo I'm taking. That's weird in itself, isn't it? Now there's obviously going to be exceptions to this sometimes where it's not always going to be ideal to use aperture priority mode, and you're going to want to use fully manual mode or maybe even shutter priority. For example, like I mentioned before, you might want to include some motion blur from some moving water in your image, and these are all things that you need to be taken into account when you are out taking photographs and being creative. Aperture priority mode is definitely one mode that gets used a lot more than you might be led to believe by a lot of people, especially professional photographers.
So in summary, aperture priority mode is a valuable tool for photographers of all skill levels, including professionals, and professional photographers will use it more than you probably think. I use aperture priority mode pretty much every single day, and I think I probably use it more than fully manual mode. So give it a go for yourself and let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you want to know more about improving your skills as a photographer, I recommend you watch this video next, and I will see you there.